in some form or another access for about 30 years. So I've kind of seen this whole evolution of where things are going to go. So today our conversation is going to be on home automation, and I'm going to do a couple of pre-qualifiers before we get going. Home automation is off the shelf. So for a lot of people, you're going to have questions about funding. You're going to have questions about how do you do this, how do you do that. You got to remember that home automation, and I'm going to show you, you just go on Amazon and buy it. And it's not super expensive. When you start putting everything together, it gets super pricey. So the average home looking at doing stuff like this, it's in the range of $1,500 to $2,500, which is a lot, but a single switch might be $15. So because it's off the shelf, the funding gets super tricky, and I don't have great answers for that. We can discuss what works in Missouri through waivers and some other stuff, and I'm going to show you a crazy project at the end that they're trying to get funded, but it's a sticky wicket. So with that, home automation is also DIY. By that, I say that word a lot. It means do it yourself. And that means you go out and you buy it. You try to hook it up. Buyer beware. You hope it fits with all of your stuff. And if it is, super cool. And if it isn't, dang. And I've had a lot of dang. We're going to talk about that throughout my presentation. I'll try to keep this PG. I have a tendency to use expletives, but I'll be really careful. Because my thing is, if it doesn't work for somebody else, well, first of all, if it's really hard for me to make it work, it's going to be really hard for somebody else to make it work, and I'm not going to waste somebody else's time. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. On part B to this conversation, about 2 months ago, I broke my foot, and it was healed 3 days ago, and I was working in the yard over the weekend, and I re-broke my foot. So, yay! So I'm going to sit and stand. I'm kind of a pacer when I talk, but I'm going to sit a little bit just to take my foot to a different level. Okay, I have a bunch of YouTube video. We do a lot of recordings. We record it on YouTube. So I'm going to cross my fingers that all of this works great, and I'm going to initiate this next one right here. This is called Lessons from the Big Bang. And it's a tongue-in-cheek thing, but it makes a ton of sense as we go through this.
The X10s are online.
Gentlemen, I am now about to send a signal from this laptop through our local ISP, racing down fiber optic cable at the speed of light to San Francisco, bouncing off a satellite in geosynchronous orbit to Lisbon, Portugal, where the data packets will be handed off to submerged transatlantic cables terminating in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and transferred across the continent via microwave relays back to our ISP and the X10 receiver attached to this lamp.
Look at me, I've got goosebumps.
Well, are we ready on the stereo?
Go for stereo.
Do you not realize what we just did?
Yeah, you turn your stereo down with your laptop.
No, we turned our stereo down by sending a signal around the world via the internet.
Oh. You know you can just get one of those universal remotes at Radio Shack. They're really cheap.
No, you don't get it. Howard, enable public access.
Public access enabled.
Boy, that's terrific, but I'll see ya.
No, hang on. See?
No.
Someone in Sichuan province, China, is using his computer to turn our lights on and off.
Well, that's handy. Here's a question. Why?
Because we can.
Go for power up. There we go. All right. So nerd skills really do matter. You need to know about how electrical things work. because there are some home automation that they say is plug and play, but in real life they're not plug and play. So you kind of have to know how electricity works a little bit. And if you're super electrical, you may have to do some rewiring. So I'm going to avoid a lot of the rewiring conversations because that gets it to a professional level that may get out of the scope of your guys' liability. I do it just because I do it. You may choose to do it. You need to know how things connect to Wi-Fi. I cannot tell you how many times I've gone into a house and the people didn't know their username and password on their router. You cannot connect something to a router if you don't know somebody's username and password. So I like to experiment with all of this stuff in my own house and write my own script. So when I get somewhere, I know all the questions I'm going to ask somebody. But that's the number one thing people don't know, is their username and password. And how do you find that out? Usually have to contact their ISP. They're going to tell you to reset the router. And if you reset the router, all kinds of things cascade into chaos. And so that's why nerd skills matter. You need to know how Wi-Fi works, range and bandwidth. Because these things are Wi-Fi connected, the further away you get from your router, the more complicated things will get. So I walk around with a Wi-Fi detector, and I walk through whatever building or facility I'm going to do something in, and I look for a signal. If I don't get a signal, then I usually pause. I'm going to show you a couple of humorous videos in which we put stuff way too far away from the router, and we got all kinds of chaos. So knowing range, bandwidth. Why is bandwidth important? If you're going to monitor people and potentially monitor them through a camera, the more bandwidth you have, the better. And I'm going to show you two different cameras that we really like, that I really like. Some of them have higher bandwidth needs than others. So I'm not going to get super techie with you guys about how much bandwidth and da-da-da-da-da, because we could be here all day. It gets really granular. All I know is the more plug and play you can make it, the better. So if you know how far someone's range is, if you know their bandwidth, it makes life a lot easier. I have Google Fiber in my house, which is supposed to be amazing bandwidth. And we're going to talk about why that's a pain in the tail. You need to know something about home automation. And for those of you who've been experimenting with some home automation, you already know. You try it, you mess with it, you get successful with it, you get excited about it, and then you immediately want to share it. That's fine, but as you also know, every 4 months, maybe 3 months, home automation changes rapidly. The videos I'm going to show you are from 2015. You'd be amazed what has happened between 2015 and now, and the amount of noise that's come with it. So I don't want to be a super Debbie Downer about it, because automation is super complex and it has some pitfalls. It's really super cool if you can figure it out. But you got to own how to figure it out, and that's the point of that slide. You need to know how to work the problem. I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten a call from a friend in a chair who says his Wimo's not working. And I'm remote, and I have no clue why his Wimo isn't working. So I have to go through in my head all of the steps to walk his PCA through to reset his router and then reset his Wimo and get on with it. So that's the downside. But the upside is he's able to control all of his life. So that's really cool. We're willing to embrace that part. Okay, so what's this training about? Training's about what is home automation, overview of things you can control and how, what the requirements are to make these things work, and some case examples. I would love to have case examples of a zillion people who use it, but the reality is I'm hoping you guys are going to be super creative today, and it's just not me talking blah, blah, blah for 2 hours, that you're going to throw out some, hey, I have a person, or I know this thing, or we're trying to do this, and we're all going to brainstorm a little bit together. Because otherwise, this is going to be a lot of noise, going to overwhelm you, you're going to leave and never do home automation again. So let's review the past a little bit. Those of you who've been in AT for a while, you understand X10. The relax in the middle, that's infrared. And the power link, how many of you know what a power link is? Power links are the coolest things since sliced bread. I think they're amazing, but they work with hardwire. You have to plug something into it. You have to plug a switch into the power link. You hit the switch, and this thing comes on for a duration of time. You can't determine when it comes on, and you can't do any of these things remotely. So the problem with X10 and infrared is I can't control those things when I'm not inside my house. I have to be there real time. X10 uses a radio signal that travels through your home, and if you have really nice walls, it might be able to turn some stuff on and not. We always had problems trying to sync it with communication devices and stuff. It was cumbersome. It was very reliable, but it was a pain. Infrared is super great if you're line of sight. So if I'm a guy sitting in, using my relax, and my TV's right there, and I'm pointing at it, that's super cool. It works really well. The minute I leave and go somewhere else, it's not super cool, and it doesn't work really well. So a lot of us became early adapters of home automation because X10s were super complicated and restrictive. And I had a big drawer full of X10 systems that I could hook up to somebody's house. The idea that I could just plug something into Wi-Fi, connect to my phone, start doing stuff, that sounded really exciting. Infrared got complicated, and the setup was really hard, and you had to do all this learning shenanigans that just made it not very viable. Now, I'm also going to back up a little bit and say it's not viable, but it's reliable. And so sometimes you have to do a combo of stuff. Go back to that environmental control stuff, intersperse it with home automation stuff, work the whole problem of the house, and try to figure out how you can do it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what home automation is. It's a way to make things happen in your home with limited input from you, and that's the kicker. A way to provide remote or automatic control of devices or events in your home. So I'm a home automation geek. I'm going to show you a little bit all the home automation stuff that I use, and for fun, I'll sit in the lobby of my hotel and check all the stuff in my house. The camera and the temperature, and is my thermostat really working? It just gives me one more thing to play around with. It's super cool, and I like the ability to go, oh my gosh, it's 32 degrees in my house. Maybe I should turn the heat up so my pipes don't freeze if I'm in Southern California. So I think it's super awesome. But it's also a way to control what happens in reaction to an event. So those of you who are interested in monitoring other people, and this is the out-of-the-box part of this presentation, is how can I take something that was designed off the shelf for everybody and make it specific to solving a particular problem? And I'll give you a really good example. Nest cameras. Nest camera, which we're going to talk about a little bit, allows you to geofence on it. And what geofence means is I can create location fencing of if somebody leaves a location, I'll get a notification. I can also draw, like when I look at something on the camera, and let's say I want to know every time you drink out of that jug right there, I can, while I'm on the Nest camera, I can draw a circle around that. And every single time you touch that, I'm going to get a notification. Well, that's really super cool, because I can do that with a refrigerator. If I have a kid who's eating way too much, I can draw a line on the refrigerator. Every time he touches the refrigerator, I get a notification. So you might be thinking, well, it doesn't close the refrigerator door. Nope. It doesn't stop the kid from eating the food in the refrigerator. Nope. But it will tell you that they went in the refrigerator 16 times in a half-hour period. So for some of that, you might go, wow, that's really cool. Others are, nah, it's not enough. We want it to do more stuff. So one of the things I want to make sure we understand is controlling versus monitoring, because I'm going to get in the definition of monitoring versus notifications a little bit later, because I'm sure a lot of you have heard about home monitoring services that you can buy, blah, blah, blah. This is not that genre. Things that you can control are things like plugs and switches and lights and locks and temperature and appliances. And by control, I mean I can take another device and I can control that thing with another device, or I can use my voice to control it. Things that I monitor might be a camera, a thermostat, a doorbell, sensors, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Monitoring you is a big deal now. So now more and more, especially health, They're getting more into monitoring of people. So you can home automation monitor people with my smartwatch. And we'll talk a little bit about how that and home automation are kind of a nice link, especially when you're working with people who are health impaired. You might be able to get some really valuable information from that. Okay? Any questions about that? So I have a term. I'm not from Missouri. I'm actually from the West Coast. I was in Alaska for 20 years. I moved to Missouri about 10 years ago. And I started doing presentations there. And I'd say that question that I just asked now. And people would stare at me just like with their eyes wide open. We coined the phrase the Missouri stare because nobody ever asked questions. So my deal is I probably will ask a question once or twice, and if people don't ask questions, I'll start asking you guys questions, put you on the spot. So what I'm going to show you is a video that we did 3 years ago. A friend of mine volunteered to be a victim of letting me home automate his house. And there's some really funny pieces in here that I'm going to stop and show you why home automation doesn't always work. This guy's name is Barry. I'm going to show you a presentation later that Barry and I did at a conference. But this is sort of the why am I here, what are we talking about video.
Oh my gosh, what a long day. It's so hot out there. Alexa, set the hallway temperature to 72 degrees.
Setting hallway heat to 72.
Alexa, turn on light 1.
Okay.
Alexa, turn on the kitchen light.
Sorry, the device kitchen is not responding. Please check its network connection and power supply.
Alexa, turn on light 2.
Okay.
Alexa, what's the weather going to be like this evening?
In Lee's Summit, there's a freeze warning in effect Tuesday, April 12th from 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. The current weather is 56 degrees with clear skies and sun. Today, you can look for intermittent clouds with a high of 57 and a low of 33.
Alexa, turn on 96.
So this is really what got us started down the road of home automation. We got super excited about it, especially in our project. We thought, oh my gosh, we're going to home automate the entire world. This was so frippin' cool. You know, there were some things that made us think twice about that. And I'm going to talk to you about what those are. It is frippin' cool, but there's a lot of hand-holding that has to happen. So how can it benefit people with disabilities? It allows one to stay in or establish in their own home. And I think we can. I think we can push more and more towards reducing PCA time, you know, for doing simple things that people don't really realize, like vacuuming. You know, we can automate that. We can automate lights. We can automate HVAC if we have to do that. So there's some of that. I guess you're going to have to get granular about how much time it really saves. But according to Barry, it increases his independence and reduces his PCA time. Increasing safety and security. You know, we've talked a lot about this with people who, you know, people are coming to their house and they want to know, somebody's coming to their house. What can you do? How can you set something up to do that? You know, here's the bummer. If it works 9 out of 10 times, what do we do about the one time it doesn't work? So you have to keep the mindset of 9 out of 10 times it's going to work really great. And maybe one time it won't work. And so what's your backup for that? Or do you even care? Maybe 9 out of 10 times is okay. So the things you really need to know. You need to know electrical and battery, because all these things are either electrical or they're battery. Do you have to master electricity? No. You just need to understand how it works. You know, how things turn on, how things don't turn on. You have to know name and password. And here's the really fun part. You have to know if something that you're buying is a 2.4 or a 5 gigahertz thing. And this might sound kind of trivial, but it's amazing how many home automation devices are based on old school technology. So as you increase and automate your home more, some of those 2.4 gigahertz home automation things don't play well with 5 gigahertz systems. Some 5 gigahertz systems, not to get super nerdy about it, you can split between 5 and 2.4 and they don't work worth a darn. So you wind up having to jury rig stuff, but just buyer beware. You got to know if it's off the shelf, you're going to need to know and understand that part. And then of course you're going to need an interface, whether that's a tablet or a phone or Alexa or however you're going to do it. You don't have to do all this with voice. I'm going to sound a little bit like an Alexa commercial, and I'm going to tell you right up front, Alexa and Amazon, and primarily for a reason. I have all 3 systems. I have Siri, I have Google Home, and I have Alexa in my shop. I have chosen to use Alexa because it works. It does a lot of other cool stuff, and it works. Hey Siri, yeah, you know, the new HomePod, yeah, it sort of kind of works, but it's not super perfect unless you're an Apple person. And Google Home, apparently last month, Google finally surpassed Alexa in sales. So their home automation system. So they're going to catch up. They're eventually going to catch up. But we're going to get to this whole ZigBee versus Wi-Fi thing in a minute, and that's where all of this just goes south really fast with home automation and voice. So I stick to what I know and what I know that works. So I use a lot of Alexa stuff because it works super well. And you can do a lot of other cool stuff with it. So there's a trick that we learned when we used to do environmental control. We would have a lamp sitting over here. We'd turn on the lamp, and then we'd say, geez, we want to control this lamp. What are we going to control it with? Let's put something on the socket that we can control it with. Well, the trick is you walk over to the power and you unplug it. And what does the lamp do? It goes off, right? So then I take that plug and I plug it back into the socket, and the light comes on. That's something we can automate. What happens if the light doesn't come on? Because a lot of the new appliances, they build what's called an on override. So that if your power goes out and your power comes back on, not everything in your house comes back on again at the same time. So it has what's called an on override. And because of that, some of the home automation stuff that you want to work with won't work with it. You can't override that on override unless you have another widget. And we'll talk about other widgets that you can use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did you say that the outlet is controlled with the override?
No, it's the actual appliance itself. So, you know, when I used to teach schools, you know, projects that they could do with kids, they'd want to run a drill, a power drill. If you unplug a power drill, it'll stop working. If you hold the on button and plug it back in, it'll come back on again. You don't have to let go of the power button and touch it again. So why is that relevant? Coffee machines have an on override. Televisions have an on override. A lot of heating systems have on override. So this on override thing, I don't mean to make it, you know, beat a dead horse. You get really excited about home automation, you start going into somebody's home and half of their stuff has this on override on it, and you're not going to be able to automate it. So you got to know how things work in somebody's home if you're going to mess with it. Washers and dryers, classic example. Not something you can home automate very well.
How do you find out if it's got that or not?
Well, you do a simple test first. Unplug it and unplug it. If it doesn't come back on when you plug it back in, you can assume it has an on override, and then you're going to have to work the problem by figuring out, is there a device that can control it? And there are solutions to it, but it just doesn't allow you to do it simply. It's just more complicated. Does that make sense? Too nerdy, too granular? So this Wi-Fi gigahertz thing, I have to stress how important it is. So a couple of years ago, we decided we wanted to cool our bedroom. We don't want to cool the whole house when we sleep. We just want to cool our bedroom. So we bought a Wi-Fi controlled air conditioner. Simple enough, right? So I installed the Wi-Fi controlled air conditioner, and I loaded the app on my phone, and I would touch the app, and sometimes it came on, and sometimes it didn't, and sometimes in the middle of the night we'd be laying there, and all of a sudden we'd hear this beep, and the thing would just randomly come on. Well, it turns out that this brand new air conditioner was using a 2.4 gigahertz signal. And we had a 5 gigahertz signal in our house. So it kept connecting and disconnecting to my Wi-Fi. So I did solve it with a $19 part that I bought at Amazon. But again, this is part of that problem-solving thing where you have to work the problem. I just bought a Martin Jerry plug, and we'll talk about Martin Jerry in a second. I bought it online because it was cheap. I read all the description online, and I installed it in my house, and guess what the instructions said? Uses 2.4 gigahertz. So again, here I am installing something into my house that's not going to work well because I have opposite systems. So knowing Wi-Fi is super important. You know, part of me telling you all this is if I tell you all this and you go, wow, this is really crazy. I'm not sure I want to do that in somebody's house. You know, I would encourage you not to do that. I'd, you know, solve it in your own house first and then go try to solve it in somebody else's house. So start with Wi-Fi. You know, how far does the signal go? What do you need to do? Do you need to walk the house, walk around? Basements are horrible. You know, people like to put cameras in their basements, but their router's upstairs in the upstairs. And you go down into their basement and you install a camera and you get everything ready to go. Zero signal because you don't have enough Wi-Fi, so you have to put an extender in it. Bandwidth is also important. If they're copper, raise your hand if you know what I mean by if they're copper. So copper means that they don't have high def that comes into their house. They use a telephone line for their Wi-Fi. So that's what we mean by copper. So telephone lines have limited bandwidth. So if you start messing with somebody's house who's on a copper line, you're going to start using a lot of their bandwidth. And if they have kids who are running videos and doing stuff, suddenly the cameras aren't going to work. So knowing what's coming into somebody's house is just as important as what you're going to dish back out. Any questions about that? So things like Google Fiber. Do you guys have Google Fiber yet up here? That's probably a blessing. Google Fiber is super cool. It's high, you know, it's super fast, but it's so darn new that nothing old works with it. So that's one of the pitfalls. Okay. I have to do it. I have to get nerdy. I have no choice. Let's talk a little bit about what's happened in the last 2 years. The last 2 years with home automation, they've said, oh, everything works with Wi-Fi. Well, that's true. So the problem is everything works with Wi-Fi, and you load an app for every single device you put in somebody's house, or if you can control it with multiples of the same thing. So I'm controlling something in someone's house with apps. Well, that became a really big problem, especially in the home automation world. So what they wanted to do is create something that could be controlled by a single thing. All the things could be controlled by a single app, not 25 different apps. If you look at my phone, I have 15 different apps that control all the Wi-Fi craziness in my house. But if I thought about it and I worked the problem a little bit, I could consider putting in a system that is controlled by a central hub. And this central hub idea is new. It's super new, but it's really gaining traction. There was a company out of Sweden that came out with ZWave about a year ago, and it's really starting to take off. And so now if I were to go back to Barry's house, I wouldn't do this Wi-Fi thing. I would do this ZWave thing. Why? Because it's so much easier to control stuff. And, oops, I'm going to see how many times I can step on my laptop today. So, you know, blah, 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 blah. But what it does is it makes a mesh network. And this is why this is super cool. If I have two things that I'm controlling in my house, instead of these things being controlled by Wi-Fi and bandwidth and signals, they actually talk to each other. And I don't need Wi-Fi at all. I can control it through ZWave. So why is that important? Because I don't have all these Wi-Fi issues I was talking about earlier. ZWave is new. I think it's going to catch on. If you're going to do home automation, I really think you need to start considering going in that direction. The problem is you have to pick a hub love the hub, and buy everything that the hub controls. So now you're a brand-specific home automation person. Yes, ma'am.
I'm thinking that the ZWave idea that you just introduced
Uh-huh.
would be a great idea for places in Wisconsin that don't have the high.
You're right. So if you're rural, you probably might do better with ZWave because you're controlling a thing rather than multiple things. But it's experimental. But I think you're right. I think you're right. The problem is you have to make a commitment to ZWave. So you have to buy the hub. And then you have to buy all the things the hub controls. You don't get to be eclectic. You don't get to say, oh, I want to do the lamp today and the garbage can tomorrow and blah, blah, blah some other time. It doesn't work that way. You have to develop a plan, grow that plan out, and stay with the hub. And I'll share more about that a little bit later. But I think mesh networks are super cool. Sorry about the nerd stuff. So let's talk a little bit about monitoring versus notification. So monitoring, you guys have all heard of home monitoring systems. You pay for, somebody watches your house. It's live. There's a person sitting watching, and they call somebody if something happens. So that's what I mean by monitoring. You're paying somebody a service to monitor your place. Do some of them use home automation? A couple of them do. And it looks kind of home automation-y. But home automation is usually buy it. Each item is monitored remotely. The person can call 911 or a family member, and it's 24/7. Notifications, which is what home automation gives you, is something that comes to something and says something is happening or something's not working. So what's the downside to notifications? I get notifications all day long. Do I watch them? Do I read them? Do I pay attention to them? Not always. So I actually put up a camera to monitor my dog. And every time my dog barks, it'll send me a notification because I made the mistake of wanting to know how often was my dog barking. That was the dumbest thing I could have ever done because I probably had 50 notifications when I was out of the house. I liked not knowing that my dog wasn't barking. And now I know. He barks all the time. So notifications are great, but you got to remember if you're going to use this to monitor somebody who's health impaired, physically disabled, whatever, you've got to come up with a system that's going to allow you to monitor those notifications. So it's a little bit different. Can you set up a camera and watch somebody? Sure, you can. When you're not watching that camera, how's it going to tell you that something happened? You got to pay attention to your phone. So paying for bundles, super cool, but you're going to pay monthly. The DIY part, super cheap, super cool, but you got to watch your phone. Otherwise, you'll never know. Any questions about that? Anybody here using home monitoring systems at all? Nobody? One? Yeah? Oh, for home alarms? Okay.
Is there any setting on phones that would
Annoy you until you pay attention to the notification?
would make a distinction between, like if you set up this is a number 1 importance, this is a number 6 importance, would there be any kind of a distinction, ringtone or something like that that you could set for notifications?
You can assign personal ringtones to notifications. You can assign vibration to them. Again, if it don't work, it don't work. If it's in your purse and your purse is in the hallway, mine, I put it on my shelf in my house. If a notification happens, it doesn't, blast through my whole house that I got a notification. I have to go back to my phone and go, oh, wow, I got a notification 20 minutes ago that something happened at something else, right? So that's the difference. Now, can you get kind of crazy about it and make it and twist it so that it can work sort of kind of in an alerting way? Well, sure. But you've got to also pay the price of monitoring it all the time. I'm going to show you later some people who you can pay to monitor home automation, but pay a hefty price. But they are now going to develop a service where they'll monitor home automation stuff. But here's the sticky wicket with what they're going to do. They're going to monitor home automation stuff, but they're only going to send you a notification. They're not going to call you on the phone. So this notification thing is a big deal, something worth considering. So I'm going to do a little bit of an Effinger home demo. This is my router that I use in my house. This is my Google Fiber. I had to buy a D-Link because some of my home automation stuff is like legacy stuff, and it doesn't work really well with Google Fiber. So I had to buy a $19 router that was 2.4 dedicated and then piggyback it onto my router. I've probably had 20 calls in the last year from people doing home automation saying, hey, I'm using a blah, 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 and I can't get it to work. It's 90% of the time it's because of that, that it's not working with their Wi-Fi network. Not that it doesn't work with Wi-Fi, it doesn't work with their router. So I put a baby router on here. This is for Philips Hue, and this is for Blink. So these are hubs. We call them hubs. So you wind up installing all these hubs and these crazy things in people's houses. And to your question about ZWave, all this disappears. I don't need to use all this shenanigans. I can use a one hub shenanigan solution for ZWave. Just something to keep in the back of your mind. Any questions about that? So the be careful what you wish for is I got super excited about Google Fiber because I thought Google and home automation would all work together and everybody would be happy, and it was a complete disaster. I had lights coming on at 2:30 in the morning that I didn't tell to come on at 2:30 in the morning, and blah, blah, blah. And it took me about 2 months with their tech support people to solve the problem. But, you know, that's that work the problem thing. So at my house, I control my HVAC. I have an upstairs and a downstairs. Like I said, I'm an early adapter. My device knows when I'm away, and it automatically changes the temperature. And why is that important? You know, if you have somebody in a chair who can't control their HVAC any other way, and you want them just to use location so that when they leave their house, their air conditioning automatically comes down, it's brilliant. It works brilliantly. The minute they show up to their driveway, their HVAC kicks back on. You define the temperature. You tell it what to do. That's what that eco means. And this is the beast that I bought that I thought would be so cool for my bedroom. And then it turns out it wasn't compatible with my Wi-Fi. So I had this giant brick of an air conditioner that it took me about 4 months to figure out how to actually make it work. Long story short, we got it to work because we worked the problem until we figured it out. This is the Wink hub, and we're going to talk about Wink hubs in a minute. What's really sad about this was, do you guys know Quirky? They're an inventor network, or they were an inventor network, where people would design these really cool things, and then they'd sell them to the public. So that was one of those really cool things that somebody designed, a Wi-Fi enabled air conditioner. It was on the market for a year, and they took it off. Do you know why they took it off? Because of that 2.45 gigahertz stupid problem. People couldn't get it to work in their houses. But you know, they didn't tell people about that. You had to call tech support after you bought it to try to figure it out. I use a lot of cameras. I'm not a total security nerd, but I wanted to experiment with different cameras to figure out what could do what. I use Nest cameras, and I use Blink cameras, and I'm going to talk about a little bit. There are maybe 20, 30 cameras that you can buy on the market. I'm not going to talk about the 20 and 30 because I've never used them. They're kind of similar, but I want to talk about why these two cameras are kind of unique and cool and what they can do. So this camera records real time and saves to the cloud. So if I want a real-time recording all the time, continuous recording, this camera does that. So if I have my parents, for example, and somebody with dementia, and I want to go back and see what they were doing at 2 o'clock, I can do that with this camera. This camera, when it goes off, only records for 30 seconds. I only get 30-second chunks. Well, is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. It might be really good. So if all you want to know is that somebody came out of a door and the motion was enough to set the camera off and send you a notification, you don't need continuous recording for that. You know, that 30 seconds is great. The difference between This camera and this camera is $99 versus $250 and $100 subscription that I have to pay every year to record on the cloud. I think these things are frickin' cool. And 99 bucks. They're battery operated. They're not hardwired. Blink cameras, just plug them on the wall. I use them to monitor our office because we have so much technology in our office. So if somebody comes in randomly, I use it for that, for 99 bucks. And these are some random lights that I've automated in my house that I use on a regular basis. And we'll talk a little bit more about those later. Any questions about the crazy stuff we do? How many of you are super excited about home automation? Oh, good. Cool.